There's a story I like to tell our missionaries. It's the story of the three bricklayers. And the first bricklayer, someone comes up to them and they say, "Oh wow, what are you doing?" And he's like, "I'm laying bricks." And the person's like, "Oh, all right," and walks away. And the second bricklayer, a person comes up to them and they're like, "Oh, what are you doing?" And they go, "I'm building a wall." "Oh wow, that's nice." And they stay for a few seconds and then they walk away. And then they walk up. A person walks up to the third bricklayer and they say, "Well, what are you doing?" And the bricklayer says, "Well, I'm building a grand cathedral that's going to be the house of God and welcome millions of pilgrims from around the world." And all of a sudden, a crowd gathers around to watch this bricklayer. And I think we have a lot of bricklayers in the church today who are just laying bricks. And if your focus is laying bricks, you burn out quickly. There's nothing inspiring about laying bricks. So if I'm just doing what I'm like, just showing up every Sunday and just laying bricks, or if I'm just, teaching a religious ed class and I'm just laying bricks, like,
that's a good word.
if that's my mentality, number one, I'm not going to attract anyone to myself, right? And number two, I'm going to hate my job, right? But if I know my purpose and I know what my purpose is for, that I'm building a grand cathedral and I see the dream that will take decades to fulfill, I wake up every day and I have passion and purpose behind laying bricks. And people, they start seeing my purpose as well. They see my dream and they're like, "How can I help, man? Because I want that cathedral built, so I'm going to lend my hands to get that cathedral built faster."
And what's curious is that the activity may not even be different.
What do you mean?
Like the act of laying bricks. I mean, what the two guys are doing side by side, if you take
They're
a
all
snapshot.
doing the exact same thing.
That's such a good-
Absolutely.
yeah.
It's the mentality and the way you communicate that mentality to others. And so like it's you have to be a dreamer to see what you're doing, but then you also have to speak that dream into public.
Yeah, it's an activity and a participation.
Yeah.
That I've got to be faithful to the work that God's calling me to do on a daily basis, but also participate with Him in seeing the vision for the future.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times we can get wrapped up on one side or the other, that especially as Christians, as missionaries laboring in the vineyard, like I can be convicted meaningfully of the labor that needs to get done right now, and get wrapped up in that. Or I can also be inaccessible because I'm so focused on some grandiose future. But like God calls us to live in that tension.
Yeah, and I think that's also a backdrop for dreaming, is that like we, by our baptism, by our confirmation, by our life in the Lord, we're called to participate in His grand vision for the world. Like we're partakers in the salvific act of Christ. That is the backdrop for us, that this participation with the Lord. And there's a story to further drive this point home that I love to tell missionaries as well, whenever they're coming to me and just asking questions about, like, I'm doing this task and it doesn't feel like it's a part of the whole, right? It kind of feels like extra. And the John F. Kennedy space station, when it was built, John F. Kennedy actually went down to see the space station, right? So he's walking around and he's walking down the hallways, and there's a man who's dust mopping the hallway, right? And as he's dust mopping, he has like his headphones in and or like his Walkman. I don't even know at that time what it would have been, but was distracted in some way, shape, or form. And I'm if I'm remembering the story right, it was by music. But John F. Kennedy comes down the hallway, and by the time the man with the dust mop looked up, the president's like really close to him, right? So he puts his mop up against the wall and he looks over to the man who's dust mopping, and he acknowledges him, and the dust mopper, again, kind of in awe, being there, seeing the president, says, "Mr. President," and JFK says, "Sir," and he then, just because he was so personable, looked at the guy who was dust mopping and said, "Sir, what is it that you do here?" Right? And the man kind of looks at his dust mop and looks back at JFK, and he says, "Sir, I help launch rockets." And there's just this like,
That's awesome.
There's just this like, there's this understanding that he had in that moment, right? And whether that story is exactly accurate or not, the point remains the same. That the understanding of that man was that this task is not meaningless. It actually gets something done that moves the ball forward to do this thing.
Yep.
And I think sometimes where we can get caught up in dreaming, when we forget that the background is this participation with God, is that, well, because my dream's so big, this little thing I'm doing doesn't get me there. But actually, it can be the exact opposite. It's like this guy knew that, well, actually, as I'm dust mopping, and who knows, maybe as he was dust mopping, he spent some time with astronauts, and maybe he had a vision eventually to actually be in one of the rockets that launched. Who knows?
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, he was doing what was in front of him, and he understood it was part of the whole. What do you think about that, Dan?
Well,
Like, when
no,
it comes
definitely. And we see this all the time. In our ministry, we were walking in like around campus one time, and we had 2,300 kids coming to camp, but we had over 1,000 kids on our wait list, and we had this big patch of trees, and we were taking a tour with a married couple, and we simply pointed to the trees and said, at some point, we want a whole nother campus right there so we can serve twice as many campers. And that's all we said. And later that day, they text us and said, how many cabins will $2 million buy you, right? I made our dream public by saying we envision, we desire to serve twice as many kids. And because of that, something was inspired in them to say, how can we help, right? And then all of a sudden, God's dream to double our camp capacity happened in the moment of a minute of making a proclamation of faith.
So